teachers, you've probably heard me say this before, the language teacher who knows nothing about language acquisition knows nothing about language teaching, period, full stop. Why? Because if you don't know how the brain naturally acquires language, how we do that as humans, how can you possibly decide what are the best practices for your students as far as teaching them a language? How can you do that if you ignore how language acquisition works, right? So that's why I say it's the most fundamental part. It's the base for everything. So for the rest of the classes, like, like, for example, you took EFL methodologies already. Normally, psycholinguistics comes before EFL methodologies, precisely because of what I'm telling you. But because Christian has like a doctorate program that he's working on, and his schedule with the doctorate program, it didn't work out this time. That's okay. But now you'll have a different appreciation for that class, because when we finish this part of the course, you guys are going to be like, whoa, let me think about what I learned about language acquisition and decide which one of those methodologies seems to work best. Okay. Now, remember that as students, and especially as master students, it's super important that you guys keep in mind that your arguments, whatever you decide to do in your classroom, should be based on fundamental findings and research. Okay. One thing is to say, oh, because I've been doing it this way for 20 years, that does not make it the right way. That does not make it the right way, right? We need to change. We need like a sacudón sometimes to be like, hello, wake up, right? We think that we're doing things the right way, but there might be a better way. And I think as responsible educators and professionals, it's our job to always keep our minds open to better ways. There is always a better way to do something. And just because you have 30 years experience in the field does not make you the expert, especially if you don't keep up to date with the new findings and research, right? For example, just because somebody smokes for 30 years doesn't make smoking okay for you, right? It's the same type of argument. Well, I've done this for 30 years, so yeah, okay. But what are the scientific findings behind what you're doing, okay? Les voy a adelantar algo, right? Most of you are going to realize that you've been doing things completely wrong. Okay, most of you, because guess what? That's what happened to me when I studied my master's and my PhD coursework. I realized that the way that I was taught, I hadn't really started teaching languages yet because I went right after, like from my undergraduate to my graduate degree, I didn't really spend much time teaching. So I didn't have a chance to do things wrong, but I would have done things wrong because of the way that I was taught. Right? We have to break the cycle. We have to break the cycle, and you guys are going to understand why it's so important to make this change, and why probably a lot of the practices that you've been using in the classroom for several years are doing absolutely nothing for your students. And the proof is in our EPI ranking. You guys have seen that, right? Number 19 out of 19 countries in Latin America for English proficiency. Yeah. Number 93 in the world out of 100 countries. That's really bad. Our score is a failing score, right? And why is that? Yes, we can find a lot of reasons. We can say lack of funding, lack of support from the Ministry of Education, blah, blah, blah. Sure, yes, that all has something to do with it. But the way we're teaching also has a big part in all of this. Yeah, so it's up to us to make changes in the system that are within our control. Right? We can't control everything. We can't control how much money the ministry gives to English. We can't control what decisions the ministry makes about how many hours we have a week of English in the public school system, or how many students are in our classes. We don't have control over those things, right? But what we do have control over, to a certain extent, and hopefully more so as time goes on, is the way we're teaching language, right? And not only is it important for you guys, and I'll finish this and I'll get off my soapbox because I'm like preaching to you, but after having interacted with the public school teachers for over a year, I realized that there's a lot of ignorance, and not necessarily in the public school teachers, but in the educational community about how languages should be taught. People in the educational community, and I'm talking about padres de familia, I'm talking about directivos, right? I'm talking about rectores and all those people. So many of them think that we should be teaching English like we teach math. In other words, here's a formula, plug in the values for the formula, and then you get the answer. Here's the present perfect continuous, right? We use the form of the verb has or have, and then plus been, and then plus the ing form, and then plug in the verb forms, and then you're done. But what's the problem with that? As you've started to see, language is not stored in our brains like that. And the proof is when I ask a native Spanish speaker to do that with their language. If I say to somebody in your family, I say, a ver, ¿me puede conjugar el verbo estudiar en el pluscuamperfecto del modo subjuntivo tercera persona plural? Most of the people around you, educated people even, will be like, mande, pero de qué me estás hablando, right? Because they don't need that information. And the verbs are not stored in their brain like that. So when we make students store verbs in their brain like that, we're doing something that doesn't allow them to become fluent in the language. We're doing something mathematical that only allows our students to complete exercises on a test. Nothing more. And the proof is in 40 years of linguistic studies, just that people aren't listening. Okay, this is not a revolutionary thing. We've known this since the 1980s. It's just that we are not applying what we know in the classroom. And that's the key. So not only are you guys going to have a different perspective on how you should be teaching, but also it's your moral responsibility to educate the educational community. It's your moral responsibility to help them to understand that teaching a language is not like teaching any other subject. Because why? And this is what we're going to see in this part of the course. Because language teaching, you are helping students through a process of acquisition. In no other subject are you working with acquisition. In all the other subjects, students are obtaining knowledge, right? They're going through a process of learning to obtain knowledge. They study whatever, like social studies, and they learn the 24 provincias y sus capitales. Or they learn the Pythagorean theorem in math, or they learn whatever, and they, right? But in our case, and only in our case, we're working with students through a process of acquisition, which is a completely different cognitive process than learning. But we are teaching languages like we're teaching math, and that is the biggest mistake we can make. Okay? Yes, Erwin.
Okay. Some classes ago in social linguistics, the teacher told us that it's very unlikely for someone to acquire English unless you study or learn it since a very early age, like kindergarten, if you live, let's say, in an English-speaking country. In other words, and she said that we actually learn but do not acquire. That almost never happens. But you're saying that we're going to actually make people acquire language. Am I understanding correctly?
So yes, I agree with what Adriana was your teacher, right? Yes. Okay. I agree with what she says to a certain extent, in that given the time restraints, the time constraints that you have, and the fact that you only have a certain number of contact hours with the students, and the way that the language is taught, students are going through a process of learning. Yes. But what we want to do, or what we should be doing, is help students more along the lines of a process of acquisition. And we have a lot of control over that in the classroom. We have a lot of control over that by the way that we teach them, right? And through the homework that we give them. Because what do we usually send for homework? What do you usually send? Worksheets, right? Some type of worksheets, practice, conjugate these verbs 50,000 times. And then what can the students do? They can do it on the test. But then I say, come here to the suburbs of Chicago and talk to my parents, monolinguals in English. And they'll be like, I can fill in worksheets, but I can't have a conversation. And that's precisely the problem. What are we doing? What is our goal as language teachers? What do we want from our students? Do we want our students to be able to fill in a worksheet with a bunch of different verbs? Or Do we want our students in the rural areas where tourism is just starting to develop, right, to be able to sell products to the tourists that visit their communities because they can use the English language to sell them? What do we want? I mean, that's a fundamental question you have to ask yourself as an English teacher. What do I want for my students? Yeah, I would guess that most of you would say the latter, that you want them to be able to use the language. Yeah, so we have to reevaluate like our goals as language teachers. And back to your question, Edwin, I think that if we send homework that is more conducive to language acquisition, like what? Input. If we send them a lot of input as homework, and we'll see how to do this towards the end of the class, right? Then we're going to completely shift the focus. Yeah, it's not about production, and it is certainly not about mechanical production. It's about language use, using the language, being able to do stuff, right? So if we, right now, I think I agree with Adriana in that sense that yes, in most classrooms, it's a process of learning because teachers focus on old school ways of teaching. But if we shift all of that and we do it in a different way, then we can go more along the lines of acquisition. Is it going to be a perfect situation? No. Wouldn't it be better if they were surrounded by the language? Yes. But we can help them to be surrounded by the language as much as possible. Yeah. Miguel.
Well, quick question. I do need to ask you this because I've asked the other teachers. Why do you think this could be one of the main reasons why we spent 6 years in school without pronouncing a word, and then 6 more years in high school learning English, but nobody can actually produce a language?
Absolutely. That's absolutely the problem. Yes. So many times you hear, you know, when people say, when you tell people, I'm sure you guys have heard this a lot, right? They ask you what you do when you say I'm an English teacher, and they say something like, chuta, yo sí estudié 10 años de inglés y no puedo más que el verbo to be.
Yes.
Colors.
How many of you have heard that? You laugh, but you've heard that because you've heard that. That's why you laugh, right?
Yeah. No,
Why
that's
is
true.
that? Because we're doing things wrong, and it's a vicious cycle. Because the teachers who are teaching that way learned that way. And so you guys have a really good, let me tell you, you guys in general as a class have a really good level of English compared to most of the master's class that I've taught, the classes that I've taught. I have some master's classes who did not understand me. Some students in some master's classes from the Puse Ambato, Puse Ibarra, even Quito. Less, right? But in Ambato and Ibarra, I've had students who do not understand me. Ask me to, one of my last master's courses, they said, can you please talk to us in Spanish? Can you explain this in Spanish? I'm like, we have a fundamental problem. If English teachers cannot understand me speaking English, right? And I don't think I have a crazy accent. I don't think I speak especially fast. I think I enunciate, I speak pretty clearly because I'm conscious of the fact that it's not your native language. And with you guys, I speak faster than I normally would because I know you understand me, right? But a lot of master students who are English teachers do not understand me and cannot express their ideas in English. And why is that? Because they were taught in the traditional way. So that produces English teachers who can only do worksheets and can't use the language to communicate. And so they can't teach communicatively because they can't communicate in the language. You see how this is a vicious cycle? So we need to break the cycle. We need to break it. You guys are capable of it because I hear you. I know you can communicate in English, so I have faith. But others who cannot communicate in English, and I've had a lot of teachers, like on the Facebook page, on the public school English teachers Facebook page, say, what website should I use to practice my English? Website? What grammar? What? No. Live in English. That's what you have to do to improve your English. And I'm not just saying this to be novedosa or to be like, you know, rebelde or anything like that. No, I'm saying this because 40 years of linguistic research has told us this. We have all the proof we need. Yeah, so that's the answer.
Yeah, but based on that, what I mean is, I've tried also to analyze this because I was trying to make my project on this, on pedagogical management. The thing is that in private schools happens the other thing, but they don't hire teachers from other countries. They do hire teachers from the same country. They have Ecuadorian teachers. However, private schools do have better achievements. Why do you think that is?
That could be for a number of reasons. It could be because maybe some of the teachers in the private schools are teaching in a way that's more conducive to language acquisition. Maybe the students who are in the private schools have more exposure to the real language. In other words, maybe they get sent to relatives in the United States during the summer. Maybe they have opportunities to participate in summer camps that are in English. Maybe they have more experiences with the language. Maybe at home, somebody reads to them in English. Maybe they watch, they're encouraged to watch movies in the original version. There could be a lot of reasons for that. There could be a lot of reasons. Yeah, so we're not quite sure, but I would say it's their exposure to real life English that probably makes the difference. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And what about the government policies that we have as teachers, as English teachers, and all obviously talking about every teacher, especially in the public school? For example, I'm telling you the reality that we have to handle right now. There are some students that, however, they have all the opportunities to access to the internet, but because they are a better performance in sport, they haven't participated in any class session as well. They haven't done any assignment. But we have to write, we have to register a grade, because there is the order that there is an order. It is mandatory that nobody has to miss a school year.
The fail, right.
And there are some students that have everything. I'm telling you, because I know the reality that my students have. And they have everything, but they don't want to work. And their parents support them. But we have to register the grade, no
Right.
less than 7.
So
That's why teachers always we say, it is 0 plus 0, it is 7. So,
well, that's right. I mean, that's a different situation, and the pandemic is altogether a different situation. Like, it's very difficult to teach a language in a pandemic, and it's 20,000 times more difficult to teach in a public school system in a pandemic, because you have a lot of students with low income families and things, and they don't have access to all the technology and all this stuff. So it's like a completely different situation. I mean, obviously, most of what we're going to see in this class is when we go back to a normal like school environment, when we're back in the classroom and things like that, right? Because to teach during a pandemic is extremely challenging for any subject, and especially for a foreign language. So I think,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it's not because of the pandemic. This reality we have to face, not just because of the pandemic, because it was before it too. And we have to do a lot of paperwork just to complete it, because the assignment is for the teachers.
Right.
And the students, they haven't worked at all, but we have to register the 7.
Yeah.
So
Sorry.
that is the reality that we have.
Yes. Yes.
I think that's corruption, right? Isn't it?
Yeah, but they don't understand.
I don't understand.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there was even a letter that they sent us that because of the number of people that are going to be in the extra credit, you're going to be, your position is going to be, how can I tell you? Because of the number of students that haven't reached the level, you are going to be posicionado or ubicado, you'd be located in another position because of the number of students. So it's not fair, because the students don't want to work. But the teacher is going to be punished because of it. We received that later before the pandemic.
Okay, I totally disagree. I'm sorry about it. But the thing is that we're talking about 2 different things here. Yeah. Maybe you say that if that happens, if you say that the student has to pass, I could agree on that. The problem is that they passing all the subjects. However, they do know how to do math exercises. They do learn other subjects. They achieve. In English, they achieve almost nothing. And that's a problem between teacher and student inside the classroom.
Right. Right,
You-
because we're talking about what we can do as far as language acquisition goes, right? I mean, we have a lot of problems. The students are not motivated. We're going to talk about motivation because this is a psycholinguistic factor that has a lot to do with acquisition, right? So we're going to talk about the aspect of motivation specifically. But like, as far as you're going to receive a lot of opposition from the educational community, this is a problem, right? As far as your way of teaching. For example, a lot of times authorities or parents are going to say, you have to translate everything into Spanish. You have to speak more Spanish in the classroom. I know of cases right now from Quiero Ser Maestro 7, in which personally teachers have told me, I failed the demo class because the parents or the parent and the jurado that they have, the parent said, you didn't speak Spanish, you fail. And they don't get a job as an English teacher because the parent, who knows nothing about language teaching, obviously, right? That's not their field, nor that's normal. They don't know, right? They fail the teacher. They give them, you know, like out of 10 points, they give them a 3 because they didn't speak English. I mean, they didn't speak Spanish. When in the national curriculum, it says nothing about translating. It doesn't say you're supposed to translate. So here, what's related to language acquisition, which is the focus of this class, right, is the fact that you are going to receive opposition from the educational community, most likely, because they're ignorant. And this is not an insult to people. We are all ignorant to something. I don't know anything about architecture, for example. I'm not going to tell an architect if that building looks good or not, because I don't know how to build a building. You know, it's like they send me to go observe an architect and give him a grade on how he's constructing the building. I'm like, what? I don't know anything about that. How can I give him a grade? Yes, I live in a house. Yes, I know what a building looks like, but that's about it. And this is the same thing that's happening with the educational community. Parents and directivos and those people, they're like, well, I speak a language. I was a student. I can have an opinion about this. Yes and no. Because you don't know how our brain works with language, right? You don't know the theory behind all of this that we know, you know? And so it's like not fair for them to assess these types of things. So like related, like what we're talking about mostly here, Jenny, is like related specifically to like language acquisition, right? What
Yes,
practices can we do in the classroom to help our students to really acquire English? Yeah, and not just go through the motions. And you're going to have a lot of old school colleagues and old school directivos that are going to oppose whatever you do. But just like Dr. Stephen Krashen says, he says, change the system. We are the ones who should be making these decisions. So like, I'm not trying to start a revolution here, but I kind of am, because this should be like a grassroots movement. Do you guys know what a grassroots movement is? So instead of the authorities, a grassroots movement is just a general term that we use for like a change that happens from below. So normally the changes are from the top, right? Because the authorities make the decisions. But in this case, this change needs to come from below, which is us, the teachers, right? We need to start making decisions in the classroom that trickle up to the authorities. Not the other way around, because the authorities don't know about language teaching and language acquisition. And they make decisions about that, and they should not make decisions about that. There's a video that I made, and then we're going to continue with, I don't know if Enrique still wanted to make a comment, or Enrique had his hand up. His arm is probably tired.
I'm sorry, yeah.
And we're going to continue. Go ahead, Enrique. Yes, did you want to say?
Yeah, what Jenny said was like, you know, most authorities focus on books that we had to finish at the end of the school year.
Mm-hmm.
And some private institutions, they focus on clients, means the parents that pay for the students, you know. So as long as you had them happy in all the ways with good marks, I mean, good marks for them is 10, 8, 7, you know.
Right.
So it is just kind of business. So it's like we have to work on education system.
Right.
Institutions, authorities, parents, teachers, students.
Exactly. That's why I say that it's your job to educate the educational system. And how do you do that? All you have to do, to put it in basic terms, is to have them analyze how they acquired Spanish. just say, how did you learn Spanish? You can use learn, but really it was a process of acquisition, but we can use learn because, you know, just ask them. ¿Y ustedes cómo aprendieron español? Did anyone sit down with you? You know, you could say to them, literally, ¿alguien se sentó con ustedes a preguntarles verbos y conjugar verbos con tablas y todo eso? No. And they're going to laugh, right? And you say, no, es cierto, claro. O sea, se les hablaba en español, así bien despacito, sencillo, con palabras fáciles y simples y todo eso. Y poco a poco iban adquiriendo el idioma. Porque el cerebro está hecho así, right? Entonces, si yo solo me dedico a dar tablas y tablas y tablas, entonces los estudiantes no van a poder usar el idioma, right? That's all. I mean, it's as simple as something like that. Yeah, that's what I was going to tell you. I made a video for the public school teachers, like for the public school system, because I know that there's been a lot of opposition. And so I made it like an 8-minute video that explains in general terms, like how we're working with English according to the national curriculum of Ecuador, which is in the Ministry of Education, right? Just to explain in basic terms to like the whole comunidad educativa, this is what we're doing. I recorded it in Spanish. I was like, look, this is how we're working in English because let's think about it logically, you know? And that video, I know that a lot of public school teachers have sent it to the parents, to, you know, to different people so that we start to educate them, because we don't have to conform to what parents say because they're paying a private school. No, fine. I'll conform to what you say, but then the student will pass the class. But then when your student wants to go study abroad in England, they can't because they don't understand or they can't communicate in the language. So what do you guys want? Seriously, it's not fair. Just because they speak a language doesn't mean they know how to teach a foreign language. Yeah, we can't give them that power, is my point, Enrique. So educate them, obviously in a respectful way, right? In a respectful way, like professionals that we are, but they need to be educated.
Janine, sorry, so that means from what I have heard from you is basically the problem is in the management, because that's my theory. That's what I think. Authorities don't know how to deal with English teachers. That's why they cannot measure the results. They cannot improve the results. So the problem persists. Would that be it?
That is a big part of it. But there's also the part that a lot of English teachers also don't know that they're doing things wrong. Or they say, here's another problem, Miguel, and this is a very common problem. First, when the modules came out from the public school system, and we'll look at the modules at the end of the class, not today, but another day we'll take a look at them and we'll see how these modules are really good for students. But at the beginning, there was so much opposition from the teachers. They're like, these look like private school books. Literally, those were some of the comments we heard. These look like private school books. And I'm like, private school books? What does that mean? Private school books. Aren't we all humans? Like, aren't we all humans? Don't we all have the same brain? Because language acquisition is an innate capacity that we have as Homo sapiens, as humans. So why are we talking about private and public schools? Shouldn't we be teaching private and public school students the same way? Don't we have the same brains? It's not about money. It's about having a brain and acquiring language, you know? So like when I first heard those comments, I was thinking, okay, well, this doesn't make any sense. And then teachers used to say, well, we don't have any grammar pages. I'm like, but the grammar is all over the modules. No, we don't have any grammar pages. I'm like, but okay. So they wanted activities like the fill in the blank, 10 questions that they all know the formulas for and things like that. Well, that's fine. But guess what? The students complete those activities and they don't understand the language itself. They're not communicating anything. They're not communicating. They're just filling in blanks, right? So like all of this is, unless you get teachers also to be convinced that we've been doing things wrong, then we're not going to get anywhere. Because if the same teachers who are supposed to be teaching the classes are not convinced and they still teach in an old school way that's not going to help their students, then how are we going to move forward? Once we convince the teachers and they understand how we need to do things, then we can try to convince the rest of the educational community. And the actually, guys, a secret, the curriculum, and I'm going to copy the link here, even for private school teachers, the curriculum, the English curriculum from the Ministry of Education of Ecuador There's like really, it's several pages, right? For each subnivel. The English curriculum is an outstanding document. Mis respetos, for real. I don't have a lot of good things to say necessarily about the ministry because I've experienced a lot of difficult situations with the Ministry of Education, but the English curriculum is really good, really, really good. So if you guys ever need like a respaldo, you know, of how you should be teaching communicatively and using the language in context and not all these drills and all this stuff, all you have to do is go to this webpage that I'm going to copy to you right now, download the English curriculum, and you have it right there, the National English Curriculum of Ecuador. Okay, so it's a really, really, really good document. All right, any other comments or questions? We have the rest of the semester to talk about all these topics. We're going to break it all down for you. And by the end of this course, my goal is to have convinced you 110% to do things differently, because that's what happened to me. So now it's my goal. Yes, James.
Hey, good afternoon, Janine. Good afternoon, partners. I would like to know what happened with long class size
Large
students.
class sizes?
Yes, large class size students, because I have taught students maybe 40, from 42 to 45 students. So that's kind of difficult. I know I know the students that know English very good, and they get bored because I have to teach and the others. So the 10 students that maybe they have a real domain of the English language, they get bored. So I think that's kind of difficult. Even a net student.
Right. This happens in all classes at some point at university too. I remember when I first started at the PUSE in 2014, I taught English too. I taught English and I taught a linguistics course, right? And then I ended up all in linguistics. But when I was teaching English, I noticed the difference in the levels. Like I would teach 6th level English, 6th semester, and I would have students who could not understand anything. And I would have students who could do a debate all in English in the same class. So I think the disparity between levels is always present. Like there's always going to be students who are really bad and really good in every classroom. The class size itself, the big classes, especially in the public school system, again, this is something we can't control. Obviously, it's a problem. It sucks. It's horrible, right? But we can't control that. So what can we do? I personally would say group work, a lot of group work where you can be circulating around the classroom and tending to the students as much as possible. Take the advanced students and have them do some of, like, for example, if you're looking at a page in the modules or something, have them read out loud so the other students can hear their pronunciation. Not say like, oh, we're going to have this person read out loud so you can hear their pronunciation. We don't need to do things like that, right? Because then it creates competition and, like, you know. But have the advanced students do more in the classroom. Take on some of your role, for example. You know, if you're doing things as a class, have them take on a more of a leadership role without saying, well, you're the best student, so I'm going to have you do this. You don't need to say that part, like, but have them do that, or work in groups like by themselves. Challenge them, giving them an extra activity. With the modules, for example, there's extra activities in the teacher's guides. So you can give them an additional activity to work on, for example, or you can take it a step further and tell them to write a reflection or to, I don't know, come up with another activity for their classmates to complete, right? Something like that. Yeah. We're supposed to teach to the middle, basically. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to teach to the middle. That means the average student is the one we're supposed to be teaching to, right? And then helping the ones who are lower, obviously, when we can. And then the higher ones, we can always provide extra challenges. Yeah, but we teach to the middle. Yeah.
Janine, sorry, you said you created a video. Could you share it with us?
Sure. It's more specifically for the public school teachers, because it's kind of more related to the modules, but I'd be happy to share it with you guys anyways. You can, you watch it on your own time, decide if it's useful for you. If it is, then great. You can share it with whoever you want. The link is open. It's open access. So whoever accesses the link can download the video. You can share the link, whatever you want. Let me just pull it up here. Here we go. Okay. Any other questions or comments before we continue, guys? We have plenty of time to talk about this, so don't worry. If you want to talk about it more, we will get there. Here, I'll show you I'll share the link, and then we can. Let's see. Okay. Oh, what I was going to say is here's the problem too. Like with the old school colleagues that you have, like who are used to teaching in a certain way, here's a big problem. A lot of our colleagues say, well, my way works because when I give my students my assessments, which are also filling in the blank and blanks in charts and filling in verbs and things like that, my students get 8s, 9s, and 10s. So they're really successful. Well, they're really successful at what? Memorizing a verb form?
Exactly, yeah.
This is the problem. The instruments that they're using for evaluation measure only one aspect, which is memorizing verb forms and following a formula for verbs. It's not measuring their communicative ability. It's not measuring if they can actually use the language to do stuff. It's just measuring their capability of filling in a blank. So we have to like reevaluate. In this part of the course, we're going to talk about how first language acquisition and second language acquisition actually have a lot in common. We're going to talk about errors. How important is it to correct errors, right? Errors are a natural part of language acquisition. They're a natural part of first language acquisition. Little kids in Spanish always say something like, for example, papi, mira, me poní la chompa. But it's supposed to be me puse, right? But they'll say me poní or he rompido esto. This is totally common, and we allow little kids to do that, and we understand that that's a natural part of their language acquisition, but we don't allow non-native speakers to do that. We don't allow errors in our students. Is that fair?
We punish them. We punish them.
We punish them and we repeat and we say, no, you have to say it this way. And guess what? They still don't fix it the next time. And that's what happens with native speakers too. You tell a little kid, they say, papi, me poní la chompa, right? And then the father says, a ver, mijito, no se dice me poní, se dice me puse. A ver, diga, me puse. Yeah, okay. And then a couple hours later, he says, mira, mami, me poní las medias. The same thing. And he keeps doing that, and he keeps doing that. Even though the parents are like correcting him every time, he still does it until one day he wakes up and he's like, wait a minute, what I'm saying does not match what I'm hearing in my environment. I have to change it. The child changes it and the child never says it wrong again. But when
because he matches with what he hears around.
Exactly,
right?
But not because of the insistent correction of his parents. It's not because
that is acquisition, yeah.
That's not because of that. So what are we doing as teachers too? Does that mean anarchy, total anarchy, and don't correct anything and just whatever? No, obviously not. But we have to back off a little bit on error correction. We have to like, okay, did they communicate their idea? Did I understand them? Yeah, I understood them fine. Well then, accuracy is secondary, communication is primary. If their errors affect their communication, then we have a problem. If I can't understand them because of their errors, then we have a problem. But if I can understand, like I remember someone telling me once, they asked me where I was from and I said, Chicago. They said, oh, really? I was in Chicago. The people is so nice. They said the people is nice, right? Okay, we know that it's people are in English, right? It's supposed to be plural, but I understood their idea just fine. Do I need to say, excuse me, no, it's not is, it's a plural subject, so it needs to be a plural verb, people are. I understood them. Yeah. So this is what I'm saying. Like we need to switch the focus. It's not math. This is not math. We're not teaching math. We're teaching a language, right? And I'm sure you guys have spoken with non-native Spanish speakers at some point. Maybe los gringuitos que se esfuerzan en hablarles en español, right? And they make some mistakes. They might say something, oh, yo quiero tu venir a mi casa. Something like that, for example, which is typical of gringos learning Spanish. Yeah, it's supposed to be yo quiero que tú vengas a mi casa. But they'll say, yo quiero tú venir a mi casa. Do you understand them? Yes. Is it correct Spanish? No. Yeah. Just some things to ponder while we start talking about language acquisition. Okay.
Then that means we should eliminate the I don't know, grammar or error recognition category in our rubrics when we assess students.
I think you need to, again, like reevaluate. This is going to be like a soul searching part of the course. You guys are going to analyze, what do I want as a teacher? What do I want for my students, right? You figure that out, Miguel. I mean, what do you really want for them? You know, do you want them, if communication is your focus, which is what I am suggesting here, right? I'm not saying don't look at accuracy at all. That's not what I'm saying. Because eventually, I mean, they're going to have to speak a more refined English because they'll need it for different things, right? Where they can't be, if in some social circles, if they're making all these grammar mistakes, they're going to be disrespected, right? So I'm not saying it's just total anarchy, but maybe if it's 10 points total for the rubric, you know, and before you had grammar being worth 6 points or 7 points, maybe you want to knock it down to 2 and give a category to communication. You know, were they able to communicate a coherent idea?
Okay.
You know, things like that. Again, this is a personal decision. Give me the rest of the semester and then you make that decision for yourself if you want to make a change in your rubric.
The thing is, I'm saying this because one of the main goals that the English community has is preparing students for international exams.
Which is an interesting point. Yes.
Yeah, private schools prepare them.
Right. So here's the thing about international exams. Okay. I don't know if I told you guys this story or I haven't told you this story. Maybe it was the first day of class. I don't remember. But here's the thing about international exams. First of all, I have to find this article. I should have saved it. Well, it was like an editorial. There was an article that came out recently about why Cambridge exams are just terrible. And I completely agree with the article. And I have to find it again. I'll see if I can find it and I'll send you guys the link. That's number one. Number two, here's the myth about Cambridge exams and all those exams. People automatically assume that if my purpose is to teach students to be able to pass an exam, I have to teach them with rules. I have to teach them with formalities. I have to teach them with all of these paradigms and everything. Okay. I have a stepdaughter. She's 17. Yeah, she lives in Ecuador now, but she grew up in Chicago and she lived here until she was 14 years old. When she was 14, almost 15, she moved to Ecuador. When she was 15, her school in Ecuador made her take the Cambridge exam because they're like, oh, she's a native speaker, you know, she's going to take the Cambridge exam and it's going to look good for our school. Okay. So of course, they're trying to teach her what the present perfect continuous is and modal verbs and all this stuff. And she's just like, I can't, I don't know how to do this. Like she was freaking out, right? So I had to meet with her English teachers and I was like, look, you know, normally I don't interfere, but this is a big problem because she's a heritage speaker of English. She already knows English. She's a native speaker of English. You know, I said, you can't teach her in these formulaic ways because you're asking her to conceive of her language of something that's totally unnatural to her. So stop. They didn't believe me. They said, she needs to know more grammar. I said, but she knows all the grammar. She dominates grammar. No, but she doesn't know what it's called. I'm like, she doesn't need to. Anyway, this was a whole big discussion with her English teachers. Long story short, I said, look, don't study for that test. I said, don't study. I said, all you should do really is read more in English so that you expand your vocabulary. Just read some of the classic novels. I'll tell you what I read in high school. You can read those same novels, right? I said, do not study for the test. When you get to the test, all you do is you use your native intuition. So like whatever you like, when it's grammar, don't think about it as grammar. Just look at it and do what sounds right to you. That's all, right? So this girl at 15 years old, without studying, and she didn't read, she should have read, but she really didn't read in English. So that was kind of her fault. Without studying, she got a C1 level without opening a single book to study. Why is that? Because she has native like intuition. She has native intuitions in the language, right? She said that her she said that her lowest score was actually in reading. that's the reason that she didn't get a C2 level, because she was marked out. You guys know that some of those reading questions are really, really difficult. And it's not always the English that's the problem. It's just reading comprehension in general, right? Otherwise, she would have gotten a C2 at 15 years old. So what's my point? My point is that if we teach in a more natural way, what happens is that the students develop native-like, not native, but native-like intuitions in the language that allow them to be able to pass those exams and get a C2 level. And that's really what they're supposed to be doing, is being able to communicate in the language. We can teach them these formulas until we're blue in the face. But the point is to be able to communicate in the language. They're going to have to write something. They're going to have to speak, right? And if we teach them through natural language, they, without thinking about it, develop these native-like intuitions in the language that they can then apply on those tests. What sounds good to you here? Put that verb. And I'm sure a few of you can do that right now too. You don't have to think about the rules anymore. Like me for the subjunctive in Spanish. You know how the subjunctive is taught in Spanish? Oh my God. It's really complicated. You all know what the subjunctive is? This is one of the hardest aspects of the Spanish language, the subjunctive. Also, to say something like the example from earlier, yo quiero que tú vengas a mi casa. Or for example, me gusta que me escuches, or something like that. Que me escuches, que vengas, que estudies, que te vayas, or whatever, that's a subjunctive, right? So they teach us in the United States, I was taught, okay, in order to use the subjunctive in Spanish, you need three things. You need in the matrix clause some verb or expression of opinion, doubt, desire, etc., negation, etc., right? Quiero que, espero que, dudo que, etc. Yeah. Then you need the word que, and then in between the matrix clause and the subordinate clause, you need to change the subject. So it has to be yo quiero que tú, ella quiere que él, nosotros queremos que ellos. You know, like nosotros, ellos, yo, tú. It has to be a change of subject. Then you can use the subjunctive. Then once you know you could use the subjunctive, how do you conjugate the subjunctive? You have to take the verb, put it in the yo form of the indicative, the present indicative. So for example, tener, yo tengo. Take off the O ending, and then you have to add the opposite vowel ending. So the opposite vowel of an ER verb, which is tener, would be an A. So for each of the forms, you have to do A, AS, A, AMOS, AN. Right? So like, so for example, él espera que ellos tener, a ver, tener, yo tengo, que ellos tenga, a ver, tenga, tengas, tenga, tengamos, tengáis, tengan. Can you imagine like going through all that when you're trying to speak? Holy crap, it was horrible. So how can I use it fluently now? Because I lived in Spanish for so many years in my life. Since I was 13 years old and fell in love with the language, I lived in Spanish. I did everything I could in Spanish. Everything, including listening to Gloria Estefan, Mi Tierra on repeat on the CD player over and over and over. That was the first CD that my father gave me actually in Spanish when I was 13, I think it was. Yeah, and so I put it on in our house, in this house, every single day. I think my parents thought that we were in Cuba, seriously. And we just listened to that music over and over. I watched Sábado Gigante on TV. Like I mean, I did everything I could in Spanish. And that's how I became fluent in Spanish. Not because of the verb charts. Yes, Erwin.
So you do agree that taking that approach takes way longer than any other process, right? Number one. Number two, a comment that I have, maybe in the same direction. Most of the clients or students that hire me, because I teach one-to-one, they want to go to live either in Canada or in Australia, and the government requires the Cambridge test. So they need to pass that test, otherwise they won't get into the trip. And they don't have that much time, or they just don't want to spend that much time. Then what? Okay, that's my comment or question.
That's a very valid comment and question. That's their problem, because language acquisition takes a long time, period. Look at how long it takes a little child to acquire their first language. Do you know, in the case of Spanish, here's a random point of trivia. So when I lived in Chicago, you know, when I was actually doing life here, basically, I used to study bilinguals a lot, like Mexican, you know, bilinguals who knew English and Spanish, everything. And in one of the research projects that I was working on, I found that if a child is not exposed to good input in Spanish through the age of 12 years old, they will not fully acquire what is the imperfect subjunctive in Spanish. Like, for example, tuviera, estuviera, hablara, comiera. That's the imperfect subjunctive, right? They won't fully acquire it through the age of 12. This is a native language, right? So language acquisition takes a lot of time. And people want to pass a Cambridge exam in 6 months. It just does, your brain cannot do it. You can teach them all the rules and all that stuff. They can try to apply that. They could try. How are they going to speak fluently in 6 months? You can't do that. You just can't do that. It's just not humanly possible. I mean, I'm sure there are gifted people in languages, but those gifted people don't want to rush through a course and try to be finished in 6 months. Like, that's not, obviously, that's not the situation for them. So that's too bad, Ermin, is what I'm saying. Realistically speaking, it takes years to acquire a language, period. Period. You can teach them the verb charts. They could try to apply them, all those paradigms and rules and stuff like that. And maybe they'll get a high enough score to pass the exam, but that doesn't mean they know English. They know about English, but they don't know English. Paco, did you want to say something?
Yeah, it was something related to the exam, to the Cambridge exam, because like when I was in Malta, like most of the teachers I work with, they told me, it's like, dude, like you can easily like start teaching here, but I told them I don't have a certificate, and they're telling me like, yeah, your English will be more than enough to get the certificate, but you need to know the structure of the exam, because those exams are designed to make you fail. So that was the one thing I remember my teacher, Brandon, he told me, is like, okay, we're going to try the exam. And the first time I took it, I completely failed that thing. I think I scored something like a B2 or something like that, like barely a B2. But it was because like I had the entire like exam was new for me, like the structure of it. Once I got through the possible situations that I could face in the exam, it was like quite easy. But again, like I totally agree with you that like learning how to use the language is way better than just like memorizing all the things, like to take an exam, or like to try to be like, oh, I know the language. And it was quite funny because there I met two Colombian guys, no, one guy and one girl, Camilo and Sharon. They spent 9 months. They paid 9 months for to be taught English in Malta. They were like in the perfect scenario. Everyone speaks English. They have to force themselves to speak English. Blah 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 blah. They didn't acquire the level that they wanted. And when we returned to Ecuador, because we kind of came back around the same time, they asked me to teach them, because I used to teach people there for food. Like they would tell me, it's like, I don't have money to pay you, but I can give you food. I'll be like, yeah, that's it, whatever, I'll teach you.
Well, yeah.
And I worked with them like for 3 months, like every day. And the production of English that they have right now is like similar to mine. And they were like, dude, like, but like this like what happened? And I was like, because especially what I try to do in my lessons when I'm like one-to-one is like, what do you want to say? I'm going to help you frame that, like your desire, what's the need, what do you want to communicate? And that was the thing that I've been trying to apply like most of my career as a teacher. And I think it's like quite successful. Yet, like you will find people that be like, no, I want to know all the grammar rules. And I'll be like, yeah, good luck with that, because I don't think no one knows the entire rules and exceptions of English grammar. But yeah.
But I mean, and that's the thing too. There are other factors like we're going to see in this part of the course that influence language acquisition. It depends on some other factors. I think motivation is the #1 factor, and all the rest of the factors are like secondary. In fact, there are some like learning styles, for example, that was always considered a factor. And just recently, there are studies that say actually It's not about learning style because all of you guys are native Spanish speakers and you all acquired your first language with no problems and you're all totally fluent, no matter what your learning style is. So they're starting to reevaluate learning styles and the role of learning styles in language acquisition. So I mean, there could have been other factors there that maybe didn't make them successful. The amount of time too, you need to be surrounded by the language over a long period of time to really achieve a decent level too, you know. So I mean, there are some other factors there that need to be taken into consideration, right? And of course, like that's another thing too. If we have one person's example, well, okay, that's interesting. We can look at the why behind it, but we need a lot more evidence, right? Instead of just one case.
Teacher, just a final question, maybe. Look, so you're saying that acquisition is mostly about time with quality input, right? Now, is there any standard or any way we can standard the number of hours required per level in this acquisition model? Is that possible to be done?
All of the models that I have seen, like all different, like for university, from university level to like, for example, the Ministry of Education in the public school system, none of those hours are the right amount of hours. None of them. None of them are nearly enough. And until we conceive of language acquisition as a completely different cognitive process from learning, we're never going to get it right. Honestly, the expectations that we have from our students in 120 hours are completely unrealistic, according to natural. Again, you know, okay, so in my syllabus, it says this week I have to teach the simple past, right? So I spend the whole week teaching the simple past. Okay, I'm done with the simple past. That does not mean that my students have acquired it. I spent the week teaching it. They might know that I have to put ED at the end of most verbs, fine, but that doesn't mean that they're able to use it in order to communicate what they did on their last vacation. You know what I mean? So we're always like equating complying with the syllabus to acquiring that component in the language when actually it takes years and years, especially to acquire the fine nuances of language. For example, here's a cool example from Spanish. In Spanish, you guys have this thing called the subjunctive, like I've mentioned before, which is super fascinating if you look at it from a linguistic standpoint. The subjunctive has a lot of uses in Spanish, but for example, if we're going to have a party, let's just say we're getting a little bit off track here, but that's okay. Let's imagine we're going to have a party and there's no longer a pandemic and we're going to have a party, right? And so, for example, we're going to have the party at, let's see who looks like they would have a party. Marlon, are you a party person?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, good. I guessed correctly. All right, party at Marlon's house, right? Caída, right there in Marlon's. He already, ya dijo, right? I offered him as a volunteer. Post-pandemic, guys. Marlon's having a party, okay? Let's imagine that Marlon's having a party, right? And I'm having a conversation with Emilia, okay? And Emilia and I are talking and we're not sure if all of our classmates are coming. We haven't heard anything from Carlita. Okay, we haven't heard anything from Carlita and we're having a conversation in Spanish. And then I could say to Emilia, for example, oye, Emilia, si has sabido algo de la Carlita? And then Emilia could say, no he sabido nada. And then I can say, ¿crees que? And I'm going to ask her, do you think she's coming to the party? What would you say? ¿Crees que?
¿Crees que venga o crees que vaya a venir?
¿Crees que venga? ¿Crees que vaya a venir?
¿Crees que vendrá?
¿Crees que vendrá? ¿Crees que va a venir? ¿Crees que viene?
¿Crees que si llegue?
¿Crees que
O llegar.
Está viniendo.
Right. I mean, you have a lot of options. ¿Crees que venga versus ¿crees que va a venir? ¿Crees que vaya a venir versus ¿crees que va a venir? Imply slightly different things. You guys agree? ¿Crees que va a venir o crees que vaya a venir? What's the difference, native Spanish speakers?
Grammar rule is vaya a.
No.
¿Crees que vaya a venir or crees que va a venir? What's the difference? It
The
has to do with what?
The possibility.
Which one is less sure?
Vaya.
Vaya.
Exactly. And that's how we use that's how we use the subjunctive in Spanish, right? So I can use the indicative or the subjunctive in Spanish, but crees que vaya a venir is like I'm showing that I'm less certain that it's actually going to happen. But if I say crees que va a venir or crees que vendrá or viene, even in the case of viene, it's I'm thinking maybe she's coming. ¿Crees que viene? Right? As opposed to ¿crees que vaya a venir? Yo no creo. Yeah. And all of that is implied within the use of the subjunctive. It takes years for native speakers to be able to fully understand the fine matrices of their language. So what are we demanding from second language learners when we're teaching, also on top of that, when we're teaching in such a mechanical way? Yeah, we're not being fair to our language learners. We're really not being fair in a lot of ways. We are not doing the best for their acquisition, and we're not being fair in the way that we evaluate them either. So we need to rethink all of those things. Okay. And that's what we're going to do in this whole section of the course. So like I was saying, since we're almost at break time anyways. Okay, like I was saying, what we're going to see in this part of the course is first language acquisition, which we're going to start with today after the break, since we've talked this whole time, but that's okay. Important information, right? Yeah, we're going to see first language acquisition, how humans naturally acquire their first language. We're going to see the influence of the first language and the second language, transfer, interference, positive transfer, negative transfer, interlingual errors, intralingual errors. How much does the first language really influence in our acquisition of the second language? We're going to look at affective with A, right? Components in acquisition like motivation, like anxiety. We're going to look at the affective filter. We're going to look at the extreme importance of input. We're going to hear a lot about Dr. Stephen Krashen. You guys all know him? Yes, no, maybe? You didn't talk. He gave a talk to the PUSE in January. Didn't I? I told you guys the story, how I got him to give a talk to us, right?
Yes, you contacted him through an email, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he gave us a talk in January. It's recorded, so we're going to watch parts of it. Yeah, we're going to talk about all those issues. Okay, aptitude, age differences in acquisition. Are younger people better than older people at acquiring a language? Why might that be the case if it is? Now we're going to look at all these points. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Anything else before we move on?
No, I don't see so.
Right. And well, then let's get started a little bit. Since the presentation should be 10 to 15 minutes, we'll do one of them and then we'll take a break. How about that? Does that work for everybody? Because we've kind of just chatted basically this whole time. Okay. So then we can start with the first one, the first presentation. Hold on, let me allow you to share your screen.
Okay.
So like I said, we're going to look at first language acquisition first. Go ahead.
Yeah, can you please activate the...
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Give me one. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Today, I am going to talk about first language acquisition. To start, a child has much to determine about the language that she or he hears. Every child has a linguistic system that allows him or her to interact with others and express his or her needs. So here we are going to start with the complexity that children face. Think about the input they receive, like in this example. A mom has one potato chip in her hand and says, "Do you like potato chips?" Or she can say, "Do you want a potato chip?" How can child distinguish those questions? If the child says yes to the second question, which is, "Do you want a potato chip?" and he receives more than one potato chip, is more complicated for him to understand the concept or the meaning of the question. The child language acquisition. Learning a first language is an amazing accomplishment, especially for a child. How can children communicate effectively in early stages? So here you have the most common ways of communication that children have. For example, the first one and the most important is crying. If you hear a baby crying, you are going to understand that the baby needs something. Or number two, smiling. When parents talk to their baby and he is smiling, is a more pleasant mean. And finally, cooing. Coos are not sounds of language, but they suggest that children are aware of sounds and their potential significance. Children use cooing sounds to play. Then we have babbling. Babbling consists of consonant vowel sequences. For example, when the baby says ba 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 or da da da, and after they can have a kind of mixing syllables, ba da. Parents think those sounds are words, but they are not yet words. For example, when a baby says ma ma ma, is frequently interpreted as referring to the child's mother, when in fact sounds may be nothing more than sounds with no meanings. And for example, here I'm going to share you a video and you can look at the difference.
Hey, what are you doing? Is it working?
Okay, you can notice that just are sounds, but in this case, we can see the mother perhaps interpreted her child's babbling like words. Okay, and the line between babbling and true sounds is the intonation. Now we are going to look that. How does babbling turn into word usage? These figures show the relationship between babbling and actual word usage. For those three children in a study, the ages of 11 months and 16 months. It is interesting because first, for all of the three children during the 5 months period, there is a decrease in babbling and increase in words, although the increase and decrease are not always linear. It happens in the same time, but in the same order, I'm sorry, but not in the same time. So every child does in her own time and way. The words. What function do words have for children? Okay, in this case, we have just the word ba for children can indicate three things. For example, can say ba for battle, and a grammatical function, it can mean I want my battle or I like my battle, or in a grammatical function, I want buy, buy. So it means children might reflect more than one word in adult language. Here we have other aspects in child's vocabulary. We have the overextension and underextension. What is overextension? Children often overextend the meanings of words that they know. They use a word for a broader range of concepts. For example, this child can interpret the meaning of cat of all physical creatures that he or she thinks that are a cat, okay, because of the touch, it is fuzzy. Or in this case, the child can use the word bear to refer a stuffed toy, any stuffed toy. Or in this case, the child can use the word ball to refer everything object which is rounded. In this case, we have the ball, an apple, or a balloon, or egg. So now, in this video, we are going to try to discover what is the overextended word. And you are going to watch the girl looking some images, and you try to discover what is the word that she confused with the same word. Please pay attention.
What is this animal called?
Sea otter.
Good. What is this animal called?
A kitty.
Good.
An elephant.
Good job. What is this animal
A
called?
crocodile.
Good job.
Crocodiles snap people.
Uh-huh.
And they cut your hand off.
What's this animal called?
Lion.
Very good. What's this animal called?
A kitty.
Good job. What about this animal?
A kitty.
What's this animal called?
I don't know.
That's okay. This one's a guinea pig.
A guinea pig. That's funny.
What's this animal called?
A zebra.
What's
And
this
bunny.
animal called?
A bunny.
What's this
A
animal called?
tiger.
Oh, last one. What's this animal called?
A tiger.
Good job. Go ahead and stop.
Okay, can you discover what was the word she confused like the same noun?
Zebra and the leopard.
Yes, she said zebra and also says tiger for a leopard. That is overextension. So go with underextension. Underextension is the opposite to overextension. It happens because children fail to extend words in the same category. It's to say that she or he has too narrow concepts. For example, a child can recognize a flower just for a rose, but not for other kinds of flowers. Or the same way, he or she can recognize a cat, like those special features, a cat which is fluffy and it's brown, a light brown color, but not recognize a cat if the cat is black or white or it doesn't have fur. At the same way about the word clock, he or she recognized the word clock because it is maybe a special color, in this case, green. But if you show him another shape of a clock, he or she is not going to recognize as a clock. Then we have sounds and pronunciation in children. When children start using words, there are pronunciation differences. And the most common is substitution. For example, instead of say rabbit, he or she says wabbit. Ice cream, ice cream. Or instead of say paddle, he or she says puzzle. In deletion, we have two kinds of deletion about syllables and sounds. Deletion of syllables, instead of says potato, she or he can says there. In sounds, instead of say train, says tain. And simplification, instead of say fish, he or she says fish. Or instead of color, says just co. Then we have syntax. And when children are 2 years old, they start to combine words. For example, here we have Mom cry, Aaron go home, Stacy play toy, Ethan no go. Okay, you can notice that in the verbs there are not the correct grammar forms, but those are content words. And you cannot find, for example, function words like prepositions or articles. And talking about morphology, Burke, 1958, devised a famous walk test to determine knowledge of grammatical morphemes. And for this experiment, you know, some children were asked to say about the walk. And the first, this is a walk. And then they were asked to say there are two, and they were able to correctly form plurals. But here is an exception, because if you say the word mice, the children says mices, okay? And they are going to learn later about those differences. And a kind of conclusion, at early stages, children involves rising intonation. Then they can put words together. After that, they can make questions: where and pencil, who that, what book name, but you can notice that they are not correct yet. And finally, they begin to use auxiliaries, and also in correct order. So that is the discussion question. How the way parents talk to their children can affect the first language acquisition. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Viviana. Short and sweet, succinct, to the point. Good way to start. Good first example to follow. Good. She included a couple extra videos there. Nice job, Viviana. That was a great example for us. Thanks. Okay. So let's discuss her discussion question. Let's think about this for a moment, right? Then we'll go on break. Think about how maybe those of you who are parents, how you have talked to your children when they're first, acquiring their language, or when you hear other parents talk to their children. First of all, a lot of parents will say, oh, my baby said his first word at 4 months. He said, papa. What's your answer to that question, that comment?
I said the word.
No, he did not say papa. I'm so sorry.
He didn't mean to say something. He was just bubbling, right?
Exactly. And this is a common misconception of parents, because they like to brag about their kids, right? My kid said his first word at 6 months. No, he did not say his first word at 6 months. That's the babbling phase. No, but he said papa. It was clear. Okay, but all the child is doing in that phase is he's regurgitating words, syllables, not words, syllables that he hears in his input. But he is not cognitively capable of associating those syllables with actual meaning. He doesn't know what those syllables mean yet. He just doesn't know that yet. So it's impossible that he pronounced the syllables pa and pa again 2 times in a row, but he doesn't know that means papa. Okay. Normally, children do not produce their first word until after 12 months of age. Their actual first word. Babbling, yes. Mama, mama, mama. Yeah, they could do that, but they're not able yet to associate those syllables with their actual representation in the real world. Okay, that's the thing. Yes, they say it, but they don't know what they're saying. Okay.
We have to repeat it a lot of times, the same word.
Okay, this is an important point. Yes, Jenny, there's a lot of repetition with children. I agree, yes. But what is the difference in how we repeat when we're teaching our children their first language versus how we repeat when we're teaching a second language learner? Let me give you an example. Okay, if I'm going to teach, first of all, I never sit down and I think to myself, okay, I'm going to teach my son the word for this thing. We never do that, right? We don't do that usually. We just talk to them, right? But if I want my son to more easily acquire the language, and I might say something like, look, not now, he's 5 years old, so he already knows this word, right? Obviously. But I would say something like, look what mommy has. This is a pen. This is a pretty pen. This is my favorite pen. It's purple. It's my favorite color. True story. It's my favorite color. It's purple. Look how I can write with this pen. Look, I can write letters. This is my favorite pen. So I'm repeating the word a lot, but what I don't do with little kids when I'm teaching them their first language is Joaquin. That's his name. Joaquin, pen, repeat. Pen, repeat, pen. Pen, repeat, pen. Pen, again, pen. We don't do that with little kids. It's ridiculous. Nobody does that because that's also not natural. It's not a natural way that our brain's going to acquire language. So we think like repetition helps. Repetition has been found to help maybe in one particular area of acquisition, and that is pronunciation. Because pronunciation is a physical skill, right? Like, for example, the sound of the TH in English, we have the voiced and the voiceless. So we have like think, and we also have these, right? We have the voiced and the voiceless version. So practicing that to actually get your motor skills to be able to form those sounds, that's something where repetition might be helpful. Yeah, but not actually in acquisition of vocabulary. Yes, repetition, but repetition that's contextualized, right? And I'm sure that's what Jenny was referring to. Repetition, but when you're talking about that thing, oh, look at this nice blue car. This car goes really fast. Isn't this a cool car? Look at this car. Yeah, but it's contextualized. Yeah. How else do parents speak to their children to get them to acquire a language? What else have you noticed? Repetition.
We can also say that we can also say the wrong words, because when, for example, if we want to say, you know, is not a dog, always they try to say the wow wow, or when you should say the cat, no, the meow meow, by the sounds, but it's the wrong way, and you can hear all of them on the streets and the parks, all that stuff.
That's very common. That's correct. Yes, they try to simplify it and say, but it's not. How is it really simplifying it? Because you have gato, that's a pretty easy word, and then you call it a meow meow instead, right? Yeah, we use this kind of baby talk. What are some other characteristics of parents when they teach their kids language?
They speak slowly.
They speak slowly.
They tend to use words minimize, something that made every word short, a little bit short. And
Right, so, they use simple sentences, right? Simple sentences. We don't use long subordinate clauses. We don't use a complex vocabulary. We use simple vocabulary, simple structure, slow pace. Intonation, we play a lot with our intonation. We exaggerate on intonation sometimes.
Parents repeat the verb in phase, ta, 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 ti, 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 or maybe they pronounce words incorrectly. Venga, mijita, a la cama, y hablan así. I don't know.
Sometimes parents like to, I think my son, like when he speaks Spanish, sometimes I notice that my husband usually like says the same thing back to him, because I think it le causa gracia to my husband, not to my son, because my son gets mad because he realizes that it's not exactly right what he's saying. And my son, if I were to bring him here, I won't, because then we won't get him out of the room, but he speaks Spanish with a gringo accent. He was born in Ecuador and has lived his whole life of 5 years in Ecuador, and he speaks with a gringo accent. I am not kidding you. I'll record him sometime if I can. But like he said, he, like, for example, he'll, like, my husband will say, I don't know, limpia something or other, limpia la mesa, or limpia something, and he'll respond, ya limpiole. Ya lo limpié, right? But he says, ya limpiole. And so he's like, ah, ya limpiole? Sí, papi. Right? So he like makes fun of him. Ya ponió, papi, ya poniole. That's what he says. But anyways, so my husband repeats him exactly how he says it, because it sounds funny. So I think that sometimes parents do that, and then kids get mad sometimes, because sometimes they know that they're saying it wrong, and so they get mad that you make fun of them, or if they can't pronounce it right, like carro. My son cannot say the double R sound; he can't, right? So when you say, oh, caro, no, and he gets mad because he hears that what he's saying is not what it's supposed to be, and then he thinks you're making fun of him. But yes, that's also true. Yeah. All right, let's take a break. Let's take a 20-minute break, right? So we'll go until 6:50 this time, 6:50, and then we'll continue with the rest of the class. Okay?
Thanks.
Okay, see you later.
Okay, guys, ready? Let's continue. How we doing? We still awake? Okay, got my vaccine today. You all have your vaccines already? Okay. No. Paco, you said no vaccine?
No, not yet. Like my parents, they got both, but not me. No, I'm basically stuck in my house. So
because you're not teaching right now.
Yeah, I'm not properly teaching like with an institute. I'll just keep teaching my friends up there. But
okay, yeah, because the teachers who are like teaching and with schools and stuff, you all are vaccinated, right? What vaccines did you get?
AstraZeneca. Sinovac.
Sinovac. And did you have side effects?
Yeah, I had a lot of side effects. I had fever and I couldn't move on my bed.
I've heard AstraZeneca is terrible with side effects. Yes.
But it's better than Sinovac.
It's better than Sinovac?
No, I was reading that AstraZeneca has a percentage. It has more
effective.
It's more effective than Sinovac.
That's what I've heard, yes.
With Sinovac, we don't have a lot of side effects.
Because the AstraZeneca I've heard is actually like the only one that they actually use the virus, like the dead virus supposedly.
No, both.
The rest of them
both it is. The AstraZeneca and the Sinovac use the natural. No, it's not the natural, the traditional treatment, but both of them use the virus. Dead virus or something like that.
The dead virus, yeah, exactly. Huh. Interesting. It's really interesting because here, you know, I'm just curious thinking like how many, I don't know why it is, for example, in the US, because when I went to get my vaccine here, you just sign up at any pharmacy, basically. And you just like, you see like the pharmacies around my parents' house. I just see which pharmacy is like close and they put there like what vaccine they're offering. And then you just go to that, you make an appointment, you just go there and you get the vaccine, right? But like no pharmacies here, none. There is not a single dose of Sinovac. There's also not a single dose of AstraZeneca. No. And so like, I just, you know, and I look in, so here, Moderna is like the most, at least around my parents' house, Moderna is like readily available. Pfizer also is very readily available. And then Johnson & Johnson. Those are like the three ones that you can get. So I was asking the pharmacist when I went to get my vaccine, I was like, what about the AstraZeneca? Because I know, because all my colleagues at the Buse also got the AstraZeneca. And I said, what about that vaccine? She's like, oh, I don't know. She's like, that one, I don't think has been approved by the FDA and stuff. And I'm like thinking, why is it, you know, that certain countries get certain vaccines and other countries get other vaccines? Like, why can't, if I want to get AstraZeneca here, why can't I? And if I want to get Pfizer in Ecuador, why can't I? You know, like it doesn't seem fair to me, is my point.
I was reading because of my pregnancy. I was reading which vaccine it was better for my for my baby. And I read that in United States didn't accept AstraZeneca as well as Sinovac. They didn't pass the testers.
Yes,
just in Latin America, we are receiving the AstraZeneca that it is from London, and Sinovac from China. But China, as I have mentioned, has the 56% and the AstraZeneca of effectiveness, and AstraZeneca the 75. But we have less effects, effects. That's why pregnant women receive the Sinovac. Okay. I wanted to get the Pfizer that it is better because just the 3 vaccinations were tested in pregnant women, that it is Moderna, Pfizer, and the other one that it is Johnson & Johnson. They are they were proof in pregnant women, but
But Johnson & Johnson for childbearing women like our age, we shouldn't have Johnson & Johnson because it's more likely to have blood clotting with like women who can be pregnant, like our
not
age.
for that.
Mhm.
But here in Ecuador, the Pfizer is just for certain people. Not for
I just wonder about that. You know, I just think about why do they just, okay, so the vaccines that are like AstraZeneca, some people say it's good, some people like say it's not that good, you know, and it's like, why do they send certain vaccines to Latin America and other vaccines to other countries? I don't know. I don't think that seems
maybe
right.
because they are cheaper.
Maybe that's part of the issue. Maybe, I don't know.
I'm not so sure.
Anyways, okay, let's continue. So yeah, it's just hopefully everybody gets vaccinated very quickly, the people who still need to be vaccinated, because okay, I'm going to share with you, since we just talked about first language acquisition, we're going to take a look at a quick YouTube video, which is actually about first language acquisition, and it's called The Linguistic Genius of Babies. Okay, so in this TED Talk, we're going to see some of the types of experiments that psycholinguists and linguists in general can do on babies, and how we know what we know about language acquisition. Just a little bit about what we know about language acquisition. Okay, so let's take a look. I'm going to stop this in various points so we can comment a couple things, okay?
I want you to take a look at this baby. What you're drawn to are her eyes and the skin you love to touch. But today I'm going to talk to you about something you can't see. What's going on up in that little brain of hers? The modern tools of neuroscience are demonstrating to us that what's going on up there is nothing short of rocket science. And what we're learning is going to shed some light on what the Romantic writers and poets described as the celestial openness of the child's mind. What we see here is a mother in India, and she's speaking Koro, which is a newly discovered language. And she's talking to her baby. What this mother and the 800 people who speak Koro in the world understand that to preserve this language, they need to speak it to the babies. And therein lies a critical puzzle. Why is it that you can't preserve a language by speaking to you and I, to the adults? Well, it's got to do with your brain. What we see here is that language has a critical period for learning. The way to
Okay. Yeah, obviously she's going to explain how to read this, but you can see basically. So we know that there's like a critical period for language acquisition, both for a first language and also for second languages. A first language, it's really important that you receive some type of input before the age of 5. If you don't receive input before the age of 5 in a first language, then you might have trouble with languages the rest of your life. Something about the age of 5. I don't know exactly what, but I don't know if you guys know of the case of a particular child in the United States in the 1970s. They called her Jeannie the Wild Child. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. Emilia, yes? Do you remember, what do you know about her?
It was like if she had lived like in the jungle because nobody speaks to her and they treat her like an animal.
That was like that was a case of a French child who like grew up in the woods. Basically, he was living in the wild. But Jeannie, the case of Jeannie is that she was abused by her parents. She was left in isolation and she was tied to a potty chair. You know what a potty chair is? Where children learn to use the toilet. Yeah. She was chained like a prisoner to the potty chair and left in isolation until she was 14 years old. They found her, the authorities found her at 14 years old. I mean, you can imagine in what conditions they found her. So obviously this caused a horrible situation in the United States. And the child, since they had not been spoken to for the 14 years, she didn't acquire her first language. So they tried to work with her, like experts, linguists, and speech pathologists, and a bunch of professionals worked with her, but she was never able to really acquire English. She wasn't able to do it. Now, they're not sure if she actually had some type of mental retardation that also contributed to her inability to acquire language. So we can't say that for a fact it's because she was 14 and she tried to acquire it and she wasn't successful. But it seems like the fact that she was in isolation for that long and didn't have any input in her native language definitely affected her ability to acquire the language, because 14 is really old, right? There's a Nova special on, you can find it on YouTube. It's an old special because it's old. The case is old. And obviously, luckily, we haven't had many, like any documented cases like that since then. And we can't put people in that situation to experiment on them, right? But basically, yes, that's what they found. If you guys want to see more about this case, like I said, all you have to look at on YouTube is Nova and look up Jeannie the Wild Child, and you can hear her whole story, what happened. We're not going to have time to watch it in this class, but you can watch it. So we know that there's a period that is like a window of opportunity. If a child does not acquire a first language by that age, then it becomes progressively more difficult. And the same with a second language. They say that a second language, according to the critical period hypothesis, needs to start being studied by this age, around right before the onset of puberty. If you don't start with a second language before the beginning of puberty, you're much less likely to reach native-like fluency in that language. It's called the critical period hypothesis. Language acquisition happens best with a second language if it is begun before the onset of puberty. So obviously in girls, that's, like by 10 or 11, and boys could be a little bit later, but yeah, that's the idea. Now in the United States, in most cases, in high schools, they start studying a second language, which is 14, 15 years old. That's too late. It doesn't mean that's impossible. They're never going to acquire the language. No, but it becomes infinitely more complicated, which is so, if we know this information, why aren't we starting earlier? In the case of the United States, probably because we don't put priority on learning a foreign language because everybody speaks English. Yeah, so that could be the reason. But in Ecuador, they actually do things pretty well. The fact that you start with a second language in the public school system in Segundo de Básica is a perfect age to start, because then they've already acquired their first language and they're ready to start acquiring a second language. So it's a really good age to start, actually. Okay, all right, let's continue.
To read this slide is to look at your age on the horizontal axis. Done. And you'll see on the vertical your skill at acquiring a second
Teacher,
language.
we cannot see the video.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, now we can.
Huh. You couldn't see the video, but you saw the chart.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Babies and children are geniuses until they turn 7, and then there's a systematic decline. After puberty, we fall off the map. No scientists dispute this curve, but laboratories all over the world are trying to figure out why it works this way. Work in my lab is focused on the first critical period in development, and that is the period in which babies try to master which sounds are used in their language. We think by studying how the sounds are learned, we'll have a model for the rest of language, and perhaps for critical periods that may exist in childhood for social, emotional, and cognitive development. So we've been studying the babies using a technique that we're using all over the world in the sounds of all languages. The baby sits on a parent's lap, and we train them to turn their heads when a sound changes, like from ah to e. If they do so at the appropriate time, the black box lights up and a panda bear pounds a drum. A 6-monther adores the task. What have we learned? Well, babies all over the world are what I like to describe as citizens of the world. They can discriminate all the sounds of all languages, no matter what country we're testing and what language we're using. And that's remarkable because you and I can't do that. We're culture-bound listeners. We can discriminate the sounds of our own language, but not those of foreign languages. So the question arises, when do those citizens of the world turn into the language-bound listeners that we are? And the answer, before their first birthdays. What you see here is performance on that head turn task for babies tested in Tokyo and in the United States, here in Seattle, as they listen to ra and la, sounds important to English, but not to Japanese. So at 6 to 8 months, the babies are totally equivalent. 2 months later, something incredible occurs. The babies in the United States are getting a lot better. The babies in Japan are getting a lot worse, but both.
Oops. Okay. So what she's showing us right here basically is that they did that head turn task, right? So like the babies were trained so that when they heard a different sound, they had to turn their head. Like they were able to train them that way. And their reward was to see this panda bear that pounded a drum, and the 6-month-old loves that, right? So that's how they were able to test this. And they found that Japanese and American infants were the same because when we're born, we're able to distinguish between all the sounds in all the languages in the whole world. So all the babies around the world can recognize all the different sounds, distinguish between a French U and a Spanish U. They don't know that it's Spanish and French, obviously, but they recognize that those are different sounds. As we get surrounded by our input, we lose that capability, and we can only distinguish between the sounds in our language, right? So that's what happens here. We can see at 6 to 8 months, the Japanese and the American infants are statistically the same, right? But something happens between 8 and 12 months in the baby's brains that they close that window and they say, I'm an English speaker, I'm a Japanese speaker, to the point where American babies get infinitely better than Japanese babies at distinguishing between the and the sounds, because those are two sounds that mean things in English, right? It's not the same rate, late. Those are two separate sounds in English. But in Japanese, they don't have those two sounds. They have some sound that's right in the middle. It's called the Japanese R, right? So it's like a mix of the R and the L sounds from English. So they can't distinguish between the R and the L sounds because they don't have that in Japanese, you see? So that's what happens at 10 to 12 months.
Incredible occurs. The babies in the United States are getting a lot better. The babies in Japan are getting a lot worse, but both of those groups of babies are preparing for exactly the language that they're going to learn. So the question is, what's happening during this critical 2-month period? This is the critical period for sound development, but what's going on up there? So there are two things going on. The first is that the babies are listening intently to us, and they're taking statistics as they listen to us talk. They're taking statistics. So listen to two mothers speaking motherese, the universal language we use when we talk to kids, first in English and then in Japanese.
Ah, I love your big blue eyes. So pretty and nice. うわ、大きな茶色いお目目。そして綺麗な黒い髪。
During the production of speech, when babies listen, what they're doing is taking statistics on the language that they hear. And those distributions grow. And what we've learned is that babies are sensitive to the statistics, and the statistics of Japanese and English are very, very different. English has a lot of R's and L's, the distribution shows, and the distribution of Japanese is totally different, where we see a group of intermediate sounds, which is known as the Japanese R. So babies absorb the statistics of the language, and it changes their brains. It changes them from the citizens of the world to the culture-bound listeners that we are. But we as adults are no longer absorbing those statistics. We're governed by the representations in memory that were formed early in development. So what we're seeing here is changing our models of what the critical period is about. We're arguing from a mathematical standpoint that the learning of language material may slow down when our distribution stabilized. It's raising lots of questions about bilingual people. Bilinguals must keep two sets of statistics in mind at once and flip between them, one after the other, depending on who they're speaking to. So we asked ourselves, can the babies take statistics on a brand new language? And we tested this by exposing American babies who'd never heard a second language to Mandarin for the first time during the critical period. We knew that when monolinguals were tested in Taipei and Seattle on the Mandarin sounds, they showed the same pattern. 6 to 8 months, they're totally equivalent. 2 months later, something incredible happens, but the Taiwanese babies are getting better, not the American babies. What we did was expose American babies during this period to Mandarin. It was like having Mandarin relatives come and visit for a month and move into your house and talk to the babies for 12 sessions. Here's what it looked like in the laboratory.
发生了什么事情哦？小小熊七七在这里，一个绿色的圈圈，绿色的圈圈，绿色的圈圈，转一下，转一圈，嘿，一圈，再一次哦，转二三。
So what have we done to their little brains? We had to run a control group to make sure that just coming into the laboratory didn't improve your Mandarin skills. So a group of babies came in and listened to English, and we can see from the graph.
Okay. I want you guys to predict something before she shows the results, right? How do you think the American babies did that were exposed to that Mandarin, that worked with that woman? How do you think they did? Do you think they did better than most American infants?
I think they did better.
Okay. I think most of us would agree to that. Okay, what about this? What she also worked with a group that she exposed the American babies to Mandarin on a television set. They were sitting in front of a TV. How do you think those American babies did? Do you think the TV Mandarin helped them?
It's not the same thing like to being there with the person that actually speaks the language that just, I don't know, watching the TV. It's not the same thing. Because otherwise I could, I don't know, speak Japanese watching anime or something like that. That is not the case.
Okay. And she also exposed a group of American babies to audio, just to audio in Mandarin.
But I think at that point, like, it doesn't matter, like, the kind of input, as long as it's an input, like, I think, like, the babies will be able, like, to recognize some patterns.
Okay. But Slilma disagrees with you, which is cool. We can disagree, right? No problem. Any other thoughts?
I mean, I believe that kind of works because that's what my brother did to his son. Like, he watched the entire Dragon Ball Z series in English with him. And at the end of it, like, the little kid started speaking English, like, better than his mother.
How old was he when he started watching that?
I'll probably say like around 2 years old, 3 years old.
Did he have
something
any other English input?
No, just my brother and watching Dragon Ball Z.
Okay.
And yeah, he picked it up like quite fast. And because I have a lot of friends here that who are foreigners, they'll talk to him and he will reply like, not full sentences, but like 1 word, 2 words, like showing like understanding.
How old is he now?
Now, I think it's 8 or something like that.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, nowadays, like, because they split, he doesn't really speak any English anymore, but like he's able to recognize some certain words.
Okay.
But your brother was in there. It was not just the TV.
Yeah, but you see my brother, he's enjoying Dragon Ball Z like as the kid is doing it. It's like,
yeah, I know like the point, but your brother was like in there like watching with them like the TV, but it's different because you have like a human being there.
Okay.
Yeah, but the interaction is like my brother is watching, the kid is watching. They're not talking. He's not trying to explain anything. He's actually enjoying it. Like,
it's a stereotypical image that we have of guys just hanging out and watching TV. Nobody's talking to each other. You're just both there.
Yeah, it was quite funny because like I use once in a while I used to just go down there and be like, hey, what are you doing? Watch Dragon Ball. Okay, and I'll just do the same thing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. Let's see what she found in her study.
that exposure to English didn't improve their Mandarin. But look what happened to the babies exposed to Mandarin for 12 sessions. They were as good as the babies in Taiwan who'd been listening for 10 and a half months. What it demonstrated is that babies take statistics on a new language. Whatever you put in front of them, they'll take statistics on. But we wondered what role the human being played in this learning exercise. So we ran another group of babies in which the kids get the same dosage, the same 12 sessions, but over a television set. And another group of babies who had just audio exposure and looked at a teddy bear on the screen. What did we do to their brains? What you see here is the audio result, no learning whatsoever, and the video result. No learning whatsoever. It takes a human being for babies to take their statistics.
Okay, so congratulations, Lima. Your argument is correct, right? But we have to have a caveat here. However, what we do find is that television does play a role, an important role in acquisition, as long as the babies become children who already have bases in that language. Because, like, for example, my son, he watches TV in English when he watches TV, and he knows words that I didn't even know, that I didn't know in English until he taught me them. Like about the dwarf planets, right? He says, Mom, you know there are 5 dwarf planets? I'm like, dwarf planets? Okay. I said, do you know their names? He's like, yep. Ceres, Makemake, Haumea, Aries, and Pluto. I'm like, okay. You know, and he learns all of that from TV. So now he has that vocabulary, which I didn't even have, right? And he picked it up from a TV program, but it's because he already had bases in English, right? He already started that interaction with me from before he was even born. I mean, he already heard English from me while he was in the womb. And they say that babies from 6 months in the womb can already start processing language. They're sensitive to language, starting within the mother's womb. So, you know, he's had English for a long time before he was even born. So at least he had the bases there from an actual human, but he can build on his vocabulary from television shows. Yeah, so that's the difference there.
The social brain is controlling when the babies are taking their statistics. We want to get inside the brain and see this thing happening as babies are in front of televisions as opposed to in front of human beings. Thankfully, we have a new machine, magnetoencephalography, that allows us to do this. It looks like a hairdryer from Mars, but it's completely safe, completely non-invasive, and silent. We're looking at millimeter accuracy with regard to spatial and millisecond accuracy using 306 squids. These are superconducting quantum interference devices to pick up the magnetic fields that change as we do our thinking. We're the first in the world to record babies in an MEG machine while they are learning. So this is little Emma. She's a 6-monther, and she's listening to various languages in the earphones that are in her ears. You can see she can move around. We're tracking her head with little pellets in a cap, so she's free to move, completely unconstrained. It's a technical tour de force. What are we seeing? We're seeing the baby brain as the baby hears a word in her language. The auditory areas light up, and then subsequently areas surrounding it that we think are related to coherence, getting the brain coordinated with its different areas, and causality, one brain area causing another to activate. We are embarking on a grand and golden age of knowledge about the child's brain development. We're going to be able to see a child's brain as they experience an emotion, as they learn to speak and read, as they solve a math problem, as they have an idea. And we're going to be able to invent brain-based interventions for children who have difficulty learning. Just as the poets and writers described, we're going to be able to see, I think, that wondrous openness, utter and complete openness of the mind of a child. In investigating the child's brain, we're going to uncover deep truths about what it means to be human. And in the process, we may be able to help keep our own minds open to learning for our entire lives. Thank you.
Okay. So that's that. Interesting, huh? What we can do to little babies. So again, we have a lot of scientific evidence for the things that we say, right? It's not just random. My opinion is, I think this, I heard my child speak, so I know they said a word. Yeah, we have to be a little bit more critical of those types of arguments. Okay. Yeah, good. Let's continue with the presentations then. So I don't have the list in front of me, but do we know who's next?
It's me.
Okay, go ahead, Emilia.
Okay, I'm going to talk about the chapter of the book that is the role of the native language, a historical overview, especially about behaviorism. Okay, we need to know that learners rely a lot on their native language in order to learn a second language. That is why it's so important to know how we acquire our first language. In the research of language, it involves linguistic and psychological backgrounds. So now we are going to see these linguistic and psychological backgrounds about the behaviorism position, about how we acquire our first language. Okay, so according to this position, they say that language is speech rather than writing, and they have some reasons to say this. They state that speech is a precondition for writing. This means that everyone needs to learn how to speak before they learn how to write. They also say that all societies have an oral language, but not all societies, but no, I'm sorry, but there is not one society that has only written language and not spoken language. So that is why this position says that speech is more important than writing in terms of language. Then they also say that speech is the act of mimicking and analogizing words that they hear. So for example, they hear something and then they analogize this word, and from these sounds that they are hearing, it starts the linguistic growth. But the question is, how do we start or maintain a conversation? There are 3 steps for this process of conversation. The first one is that we need to have a practical event. A practical event can be, for example, how are you feeling, or something you see. In one example that I am going to give you a practical event can be that you are hungry. That's the practical event. The second step is that the speech event. That is when you actually make the sounds and you produce words about the practical event. So you would say, for example, Mom, I am hungry. And then you have a response from the listener. So the listener says, okay, I will make you a sandwich. That is the steps. Those are the steps for a conversation. But so now we can say that a speech is a reaction to a certain stimulus. But how do children learn to behave this way, to respond to an stimulus? This is why it's important to know how a language acquisition takes place. First, children start with the babbling, that is the imperfect repetition of something that they heard. The child repeats the movement and the sounds, and then this repetition becomes a habit. So he keeps repeating and repeating the sounds that strikes his or her ear. Then we have the pairing of this stimulus with a specific response. This part depends on another native speaker around the child. So when the child hears the sound from the other native speaker, the habit comes to play, and the child utters the syllable that he's imitating. And then he or she learns the use of the word. He learns the use of the word because this response comes, the stimulus comes with a certain response. For example, if the baby is saying the syllable da, and the mom says, yes, daddy, and he shows him his daddy, he is he is relating the sound da with his dad that comes close to him when he says the words da. So he has a response, and he knows that when he uses the word da, his daddy is going to come closer to him. Then there is the absence of a stimulus creates another stimulus that gives the child the same response. For example, the child is saying the word da, 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 but he's not getting the response. So he creates another stimulus that he starts, for example, crying, saying the word da, and then he gets the same response. And this is when he or she understands that he can ask or want something with the speech. And finally, we have the last step, that is that repetition, that with repetition comes perfection. If the child has a correct performance of the speech, he's going to see better results. For example, every time he says daddy, her daddy is going to come. But if he says, for example, dappy, they are going to say no, no dappy, it's daddy, and then his daddy is going to come. So when he says the correct word, he has better results of the response. And this means that learning a language is the habit of a stimulus and response. Now we have the psychological background, and here it comes an important word, that is the word transfer. This means that learning of task A can be transferred to the learning of task B. It can affect the learning of task B, and also it can affect how fast and well we learn new things. This means that the old knowledge and skills can be transferred to a new situation. For example, if you know how to play tennis, you know how to hold the racket, you know everything about playing tennis, and you want to learn to play ping pong, you have this old knowledge and skills that can be transferred to this new situation, and they are going to help you to play ping pong because you know how to hold the racket, how you answer with the ball. So this old knowledge is helping in the new situation. This means that learning is a cumulative process because you don't start from zero. It's not like your brain is empty, but it's a cumulative process with all the things that you already know. Now we have positive and negative transfers. Facilitation is a positive transfer because it means that the transfer is working, like in this example of tennis. It is positive because it affects positively playing tennis to learning how to play ping pong. But also there is interference, and this is a negative transfer because it means that it doesn't work. For example, in Spanish, if someone is riding a bike, I can go and say, montas bien bici, and it works. But if I try to transfer this knowledge and I say in English, rides well bike, it doesn't make sense. So that means that the transfer it's not helping, so it doesn't work. There are two types of transfer. The first one is the retroactive inhibition. That means when new learning acts in the previous learning. For example, this happens when we have language loss, that it acts in the previous learning. And also proactive inhibition. That means that responses that were already learned appear in situations where a new set of things is required. Not something that we already know, but a new set of habits.
Okay, let me interrupt you for a moment, please, Emilia. By the way, guys, I'll interrupt you during your presentations. That doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. I just want to add some more examples or some more evidence or whatever, okay, to clarify some topics. Positive and negative transfer are important concepts in language acquisition. So let me just explain them in a different way, okay? What Emilia said is correct, it's accurate, but just to have another example, positive transfer is when we take a structure, an element from our L1, right? L1 is our first language, L2 is the second language we're learning, right? So when we take a structure or element from our L1 and we transfer it over into our L2, and the result is grammatical. In other words, for example, in Spanish, you can say, tengo un hermano y una hermana, right? If I take that and I literally translate it into English and I say, I have one brother and one sister, it's a good structure. It's good, right? We all agree that's grammatical. However, if I take a structure from my L1 and I kind of like literally translate it into my L2 and the result is ungrammatical in my L2, then we have negative transfer, right? So let's take an example again from Spanish and English. So in Spanish, you can say something like, tengo 20 años. Yeah. If I take that and in English, I say, I have, like the one that Emilia just gave us, montas bien bicicleta. If we take that and I say, I have 20 years, the result is ungrammatical in English. And by ungrammatical, I mean that's something that no native speaker of English would produce. Okay, they would not say that, I have 20 years. You can say, I am 20 or I am 20 years old, but not I have 20 years. Okay, that's negative transfer. Negative transfer. Got it? We see the difference? Now, this as far as related to translation, this related to translation is like if we use translation a lot in the classroom, one of the consequences of using translation a lot in the classroom is actually getting more negative transfer. In other words, if I'm constantly relying on the first language, I'm creating a dependency on the first language that makes students take things directly from the first language and put them in their second language. Do you see what I mean? So we can have more negative transfer in that way. Make sense? There's a lot of reasons why we should not use translation as our main technique for teaching, a lot. But this is one of them, is that it causes more negative transfer, more than necessary, because you're always going back to their L1, right? And so they just take the structures from their L1 instead of thinking directly in English. Okay? Everybody got the difference between positive and negative transfer? If I ask you for an example, you'd be able to do it? Positive transfer, structure from L1 into L2, result is grammatical. Negative transfer, structure from L1 into L2, result is ungrammatical. Okay? Yes, go ahead, Emilia, thank you.
Okay, so this means that language one influences, inhibits and modifies our second language and our second language learning. Because when you learn a second language, you are creating a new set of habits. That's why sometimes what happens is that habits of the childhood of our first language interfere with the creation of the new set of habits of our second language. That's why sometimes we can have problems with the learning of second language when we do these negative transfers, because we need a new set of habits for the second language. And the discussion question is, have you seen L1 interfering in the learning process of L2 in your students?
What do you guys think? What examples of negative transfer have you seen in your students? What errors do they make that you think are based on Spanish?
One of the mistakes is exactly from brother and sister. They would say two brothers when they mean siblings. They just don't know the word siblings, and they were referring to a female, you know. So that's one example. They should have said siblings.
Or a related one like that, Erwin, is my father's, right?
Parents.
And so I was like, wow, I didn't know that gay parents were able to adopt an Ecuador. Like, oh, you do have two fathers. I didn't know that. It's possible. But no, they mean my parents, right? But they say fathers, the same in the same vein, right? In the same sense that Erwin is saying brothers. Mm-hmm. What other ones have you noticed?
They also translate parents like parientes, no padres.
Mm-hmm.
So parientes like relatives.
Mm-hmm. Marlon?
Plurals could be a negative transfer or not?
Which one?
Plurals, Like, for example, when you say, okay, we have raton and they say mouse, and then you say ratones and they say mouses. So it could be a negative transfer or not.
This is an interesting question. That one you can't be sure until you test it, because there are a lot of irregular concepts in the English language that could be universal errors that are not necessarily due to the first language. Then that's one example, right? So irregular plurals could be an error that Chinese speakers learning English make, that Arabic speakers learning English, French speakers learning English, right? It might be something that's universal. In order to figure that out, we would have to test it. We'd have to set up an experiment in which we have all different speakers of different L1s and see if they all make the same types of errors, regardless of how their first language works. Yeah. Like the word, like the example that I gave you guys earlier, people, oh, the people is nice. Okay, your first thought would be negative transfer from Spanish, because we say la gente es in Spanish, right? Pero cuidado, because people, what about people? It's an irregular plural word. It doesn't end in S. Most plurals end in S. So logically, we would think this is a singular word. The verb needs to be singular. So don't be so quick to assume that it's Spanish that's at fault. It might be something that's just simply more universal, that they're not translating. It's just that people seems like a singular word. And in order to test that, we would have to take different speakers of all different languages. For example, French. In French, they have, it's plural. Yeah, you say les, L-E-S, gens, G-E-N-S, and then you conjugate the verb in plural, sont, S-O-N-T, right? So if we find that French native speakers learning English make the same error as Spanish native speakers learning English, then maybe that error is not due to their L1, but it's a universal error. Right? We're going to look at intralingual and interlingual errors, and you'll see what I mean. Okay, so we would have to almost test that one. How about a sentence like, I like very much the music? For someone who wants to say, I like music very much. This is probably from Spanish because of the morphosyntax of Spanish. You say, me gusta mucho la música. But if in English we say the music, we're not saying music in general, right? We're saying a specific music. Me gusta, like I like very much the music that they play at that bar, for example, right? A specific music. And we don't put the adverb very much in the middle of the sentence. We say, I like music very much, but they're probably doing a direct transfer from Spanish and getting that construction. And a lot of times these types of constructions are due to a lot of translation in their learning process. Yeah. Okay. Any other examples?
Maybe the words realize, they say that I realized my homework, but they mean they did their homework. As well, the other word actually, they say, actually I'm here, but they want to say that currently instead of actually.
Exactly.
We have several. They mean like a strict person, and several not as many.
Could be something very new because we don't have like, they can say different things in order to ask for age.
Okay. Any others?
Learning English may say it's raining instead of it is raining.
Okay, so deleting the subject, yeah. Also it could be the use of full, because they'll say like, I've heard before, I have full homeworks. I have full homeworks. This is not a universal error. This is because of Spanish, because of the use of full. Tengo full deberes, but in English, we don't say I have full homeworks. Homeworks, we don't say, we only say it in singular, right? And you can't have full homework. Yeah. Also, I lost the level, perdí el nivel. Exactly. That's another example from Daniel in the chat. Good. So you get the idea, right? Okay.
One
yes.
About the sounds, when we Spanish, we are learning as the second language English, and we tend to use, you don't pronounce correctly the TH sounds, the fricative sounds. So we tend to create or remake these sounds in our main tone.
Yes.
This is
because of interference, phonological interference from your first language. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Carlita, let's see if we can continue with you. Maybe we won't be able to discuss your discussion question too much today, but we can always start with that tomorrow. Go ahead, Carlita, please. The last presentation for today.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. I'll talk about the contrastive analysis hypothesis. And just to give you a brief introduction, this was an idea introduced by Robert Lato, who's the author of the Linguistics Across Cultures book. And he maintained the assumption that second language acquisition can be done in a systematic way. So what does he mean by systematic? Well, actually, the contrastive analysis hypothesis says that by comparing two languages, your L1 and your L2, you can isolate what needs to be learned and what does not need to be learned. So in other words, if you have a similar structure in your L1 and your L2, it could be satisfactorily transferred. So you won't have any difficulty. Whereas if you have a different structure that does not coincide with your native language, it means that you will have difficulty and you will have trouble, and it means that you will be unable to transfer that as the previous one. So there are some assumptions that hold this theory, especially that language is a habit, as Emilia said before. According to the behaviorist theory, it's been said that whenever we are learning a language, we can imitate, and that imitation sooner or later becomes a habit. And learning a language is learning a new set of habits. Also, it is being said that students or learners produce lots of errors because of the influence of their native language. So the native language is the major source of error production. And also the sense that we have greater differences, it means that the students will make more errors because there are no equivalents in their native language. And finally, that everything that is different or dissimilar is the thing or the specific point that the students should learn, meaning that the things that they already know and that are similar in the two languages are not of major importance. So now there are two positions towards the contrastive analysis hypothesis. The first one is the strong view, and it's also known as the predictive view, and the weak view, which is also known as the explanatory view. So the strong view says that we can predict the errors in language learning, and based on that, we can assure that the student will have successful learning. And also as teachers, we can choose the best methods and materials to prevent them from making those errors. And the weak view says that by analyzing the errors that the students actually made in actual speech, we can start analyzing and contrasting whether those errors have interference with their native language. So there have been some criticism because the strong view is assumed to be failure, whereas the weak view is assumed to be like to gain credence. So in this case, I have a couple of examples for you. In here, for example, we have the example, he come yesterday. So I don't know, do you guys think this is because there is a transfer because their native language, like interference between their native language with their mother tongue? Anyone can tell me, or does it not have to do with that?
Could be when you generalize the rules. So this is not an interference, it's just a grammatical error that happens.
Exactly. It means like the person is falling into the pattern that regular verbs should add the suffix ed, and it's doing that with the irregular verb, and it's not because there is an interference with their native language. Another we have here, and also here we can say that the error cannot be predicted based on the comparison with the two languages. Another example is over here. We have a French speaker and an English speaker. The English speaker is trying to learn French, whereas the French speaker is trying to learn English. And as we can see, the French speaker produces a well-structured sentence. I see them. But in the case of the English speaker, he is mistaken. Can anyone tell me why? What happened with the English speaker?
Is in past.
In past, maybe another idea?
The English speakers has an interference because the structure, the position
Yes,
of the
exactly.
object is at the end. And
Exactly. Sorry, Raul, for interrupting. Yeah, that's true. So there is an interference because the English speaker, as in English, we use the object pronoun after the verb. He's doing the same thing with French, but that doesn't happen because in French, the object pronoun precedes the verb. So in this case, we can say that the native language is a driving force in one case, but not in the other. So we cannot make a generalization that this will always happen. And then let me check. Another one, and the last one, the idea has to do with this. For example, in here, the student said this sentence, but at that moment it was 6 o'clock. So in this case, the teacher was pointing out the use of the preposition in. He wanted the student to realize that there was a mistake in there. However, the student was having difficulty whether she should have said it was 6 o'clock or it had been 6 o'clock. So most of the time, the extreme view suggests that where is difficulty, it's because there is an error. But in this case, we can see that there is not an error. However, the student is struggling. So again, it's not okay to make that generalization. So because just comparing two languages is not a matter of just comparing the structures, there were other authors who tried to go farther than that, and they created this hierarchy of difficulty. The first one is the easy one. So it says the correspondence. Whenever we have the same item, or the same item in the native language and the mother tongue, there will be no difficulty because there is no difference. As you can see, the suffix in Spanish, ando and ing. So whenever students encounter this, a Spanish speaker learning English, he won't have difficulty. Now, the next example is causing. It happens when, in this case, we have an Italian speaker who's trying to learn English, but for him, and it happens also in Spanish. So we say conocer and saber, but in English, we have just one word that is equivalent for both, that is to know. So one term or one form is merging into one. The next one is when we have an absent category. So for example, in English, we have an article system, but it's not the case of Japanese. In here, there is no an article system, which means that the English speaker will need to forget that there is an article system in order to master Japanese. The other one is that there is a new category. It is the other way around. So in here, no article system in Japanese, but if the speaker wants to master English, he will need to adapt and learn the article system from English. And the one that is considered the most difficult is differentiation. So going back to the example, no, in here, in English, we use no for conocer and saber, but in Italian and in Spanish, we have two. So it might cause difficulty because the learner will have to realize and will have to embrace the fact that there might be some cases where he needs to use no for conocer, no for saber, depending on the context. And that's what makes it difficult. So as a conclusion, the role of the native language is not disregarded, but in this case, what they want to say is that there must be other factors affecting the second language acquisition. It could be the age, a person that knows other languages. It could be also motivation, the attitude. Apart from this, the contrastive analysis hypothesis needs validation, and that validation can be done through error analysis, which means that we can actually analyze the errors, but being produced by students, not just predicting what they are going to say or what would be the difficulty that they will face. And this is my discussion question.
Okay, we can talk about the discussion question to start tomorrow's class. I think that would be a good way to refresh our memory, what we discussed this evening. But yeah, basically, if you guys saw the note in the chat, all right, I said that what they do in this book is they take us through like a tour of the history of language acquisition theory, right? So the contrastive analysis hypothesis was a while ago, and we've developed new ideas since then, but the role of the native language in second language acquisition cannot be ignored. We can't turn it off. We can't get it out of our heads, and we can't prevent it from influencing the process of acquiring a second language. That's a given. We can't avoid that, but we can reduce the amount of negative transfer choosing to teach in a way that doesn't make students depend so much on their first language, right? We can use something called translanguaging, which we'll see later in another class. Instead of using translation, we can use something called translanguaging, which has become popular in the last decade, which is using the L1, but not to translate, using the L1 in a strategic way. So we'll take a look at how that works in a class in the future. Okay, cool. All right, so Carlita, if I forget, please remind me that tomorrow we're going to start with your discussion question. Thank you very much for your presentations today, guys. Nice job, concise, clear. That's a good way to start. So now you all have a model to follow. Cool. Have a good night, guys, and we'll see each other tomorrow.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. See you tomorrow.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.